When do the flaws and sins in storytelling become no longer forgivable? Let's talk about it right here, right now, totally unscripted and minimally edited. Hey, this is the Sword and the Pen Reflections. It is my casual alternative to that channel. I was thinking about this problem when I was doing my last live stream on Rings of Power, and I want to mention my next live stream before I forget. It's going to be this Friday, that is July 19th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time or Arizona time, and the subject is going to be Wheel of Sin. That was the best I could come up with. I could have been Wheel of Trash, but Wheel of Sin sounds fine. Where we can talk about the things that the Wheel of Time show has been doing that is completely unforgivable. And what is it that makes it unforgivable? And I'm not just talking about it as an adaptation. I'm talking about it on its own. The show by itself has done things that make it, I just can't anymore. So again, that is this Friday, July 19th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time or Arizona time. And the subject is the Wheel of Sin. All right, so getting back to the main subject. I was thinking about this and I realized that this is a very big problem, especially with movies and TV shows that we see coming out. And I don't know if it has to do with the problem where we've got writers and all kinds of talent spread too thin and they're overworked. I'm not sure if that might be the issue or if there's something else at play. Maybe there's a system in how a story is edited or even composed, and it's bringing us material that is so flawed that even when we go in with the best of intentions saying, I really want this to be good, we end up sitting back going, I just can't take it anymore. For me, there was a very specific moment in the Wheel of Time when this happened. And after that, I was not willing to overlook anything. I wanted to point out every single mistake it was making. It was as if it reached a point where I said, okay, you've tested me enough. You've had 3 strikes. You're out. Now you can't do anything wrong ever again. And that is what happened to my review series. It just became a huge rant where I'm picking apart every single scene. In season 1, I was picking apart every single line because it was that bad. But I think this happens with a lot of people where we are willing to forgive a certain kind of mistake and a certain frequency of mistakes. And I thought this would be a good thing for us to discuss. When do we stop forgiving? The first thing we want to do, though, is make sure we look at what is forgivable. For me personally, my threshold of tolerance for imperfections and flaws in storytelling lies somewhere on a spectrum between 3 categories and their extremes. So the first one would be the frequency of these mistakes. I think that's kind of an obvious one to everybody, is if there are very few flaws, then we're willing to forgive the little ones that are there. If there's a lot, it gets hard to overlook them because they seem to pop up everywhere, and a flaw will take you out of the story. A flaw will make you go, that doesn't make sense. Wait a minute. How did this work? Why is this character acting this way? The next category is how much that particular problem is affecting everything else. Like, is there a chain reaction? So is it isolated? If it's really isolated, it's forgivable. If it doesn't affect anything else, like, okay, it was just one thing, we kind of go, yeah, I really love this movie or this show or this book. I just don't like that one character, or I just don't like this little bit in the magic system, or I can't stand all the time that they spend in Camelin. Whatever it is that you don't like, and it's isolated and it doesn't affect like everything else. If they're not in that town for the rest of the book series, then it's not affecting the rest of the book series. Okay, and then the other extreme of that would be that it does affect everything else in the story. A chain reaction, like we'll go over examples, but I'm just going to point out what these categories are first. So something that when you change that, it affects everything, because that one thing being messed up is going to kind of be like the foundation of whatever it is it's setting up being pulled out from underneath it. So everything else is going to feel weak on top of it. I'm just going to say the example that stands out to me the most, and that is going to be Lan and Nynaeve's romance. That was my tolerance limit in, I think it was season 1, episode 3. Remember, we're just talking about the show on its own as an isolated discussion on the show and its storytelling. I couldn't stand it. I didn't believe that these 2 characters would get together. So anytime there was supposed to be romantic tension, or this was supposed to be some really moving thing for Nynaeve as a character or Lan as a character, I didn't care. I didn't believe it. It annoyed me because I was like, they shouldn't be together. They didn't get together in a way that was believable. Not only did their characters' personalities not work, but the way that they got pushed together really felt like they were forced. It felt like forced romance. It did not feel natural. The third category is whether or not it is a superficial mistake or a foundational mistake. So superficial would be more on the forgivable side. Foundational would be obviously big problems. So a superficial mistake would be something that really doesn't affect the overall enjoyment, but it is something that's there throughout. For instance, if you're reading a book and you don't especially enjoy the poor language skills of the narrator, but the characters are great and the story is awesome and you just really enjoy the world that has been set up and you like the adventure that you're experiencing through this story, but you're like, the prose, they ain't so good. I can overlook poor prose if I really enjoy everything else. On the extreme side, if it's something foundational, for instance, you can't really have a novel without, good characters or a great story to go along with it, something that feels satisfying. If it's a big crack in one of those things, like your main character is completely unlikable and you're supposed to like them and it seems obvious like you're supposed to like them and you're just like, I can't, I don't enjoy this character. They are written so poorly. You can't really enjoy their story then because you have to be in that character's head all the time. Now, there is an objective scale for this, and I have talked about it in past videos. I believe I talked about it on The Right Advice also, called objective likability. And yes, I totally acknowledge that liking something is subjective if you're talking about it in terms of whether or not an individual likes something. However, there is a definition for something that is objectively likable, and that is if it is serving its purpose successfully in its role in the story. If it's a character we're talking about, we want to measure them on a spectrum and ask ourselves, are they positively contributing to the plot or the character relationships in accordance with their role in the story and with how the audience is supposed to perceive this character. So if we're looking at, okay, so like this is always the example that I like to give, okay? Likability. Is a character likable? Let's look at the spectrum from unlikable to very likable. Joffrey in Game of Thrones. He's probably one of the most hated characters in all of literature and cinema, well, modern literature and cinema. I guess Professor Umbridge would be also. As far as objective likability is concerned, though, they are very high up on the spectrum of likability because they're fulfilling their role in the story. They are positively contributing to what their job is in the story. Joffrey, he is a serious antagonist. We are supposed to hate him, so it's also fulfilling the audiences, the intended effect on the audience is being fulfilled here. We are supposed to hate him. We're supposed to fear him. And does he do that? Yes, he does quite well. Does the writer want us to hate them and like be cheering when he finally dies and enjoy watching him suffer? Yeah, and do we? Absolutely. So Joffrey, very high up on the scale of objective likability. We can do the same thing with any hero also. So Princess Leia, she's actually a very good example of a character who is kind of antagonistic, especially towards Han, and especially more in the beginning of the story. However, she positively contributes to the story, the plot, in relation to what her role is in the story. And we as the audience understand why she feels the way that she does. Like we feel about her the way that we're supposed to. She's smarter and more strategic and quicker thinking than the two guys that come to rescue her in A New Hope. Why? Because she's been in bad situations like this before where she's had to escape from imprisonment, most likely. That's what we imagine anyway. She's thought about these things before. These guys haven't. They break into the prison and they're stuck on the prison deck. How are they going to get out? They don't know what they're doing. And she realizes we're about to get our asses kicked. So she grabs one of their rifles and blasts open the garbage chute and says, get in. Like, this is a way out. We have no other way out. we can't go through the stormtroopers that are blasting in our direction, so this is our only route. Like, she was the only one who thought of something. So she was positively contributing to what their goals were, what the plot was meant to be doing. Like, she's a hero. So she was helping the heroes move in that direction. As far as her relationships go, she throws some tension in there, and we needed to have some tension between these characters that wasn't so obnoxious that we couldn't like her. And she was likable because the things that she did were correct. Like, she was smart. She knew what they had to do. And she had a little bit of an attitude about that, and that rubbed up against Han, obviously, who likes being in charge. And because of the way she treats him in those moments, it inspires him to step up, especially in the second movie. Well, the third one, the first one as well. He comes out and saves the day at the very end. But I think that was a lot from Luke as well. But especially in the second film, he sticks around because of Leia, because he loves her. Anyway, okay, so you get the idea. He's fulfilled his objective likability. He's high up on the spectrum of likability because he does what his character's supposed to do. And I was talking about Princess Leia, and then I switched to Han for some reason. But I think that I've made my point clear. Okay, I do want to take some time, though, to look at the Wheel of Time, because there was a point where I simply reached my limit in what I would tolerate, and then I just wouldn't forgive anything. It was because there were problems that were happening too frequently in too many different areas of the story. They weren't isolated issues. They were things that were affecting the grand scheme, or they were things that were having a butterfly effect later on. And they were problems that were foundational, things that were setting up instability in the story that wasn't ever addressed, or it wasn't addressed properly, or it never came to fruition in any way. And you just kind of went, what's the point? So let's go over some of those things. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way for you to support the channel, and for me, it might bring in some money from all the commercials they keep putting on my videos. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon or Ko-fi. I've got links in the description. Or you can hit the money heart thanks button down below. Now, let's get back to it. Now, these I did write down because I wanted off the top of my head, like, what could I think of over like 10 minutes, and I just started writing them. So the first one was lacking awareness of distance and time. I felt like maybe 48 hours had gone by in that first season when they finally get to Tar Valon, or Tar Valon, however you pronounce it, because I hear it every way now. I thought it was like only a couple days, and turns out it's supposed to be a few weeks, and I had zero awareness of that because it wasn't addressed. Now, on its own, normally, I wouldn't really have a huge problem with that as long as I felt like my characters were experiencing a lot of things. If I get to the end and I go, oh, that was supposed to be like several days, then I'd be like, okay, I guess they did experience a lot. The boys went on these adventures, and Egwene and Perrin went on this other adventure, and, poor Moraine and Lan, they're doing this thing. If they're doing a lot of stuff along the way and you feel like they have accomplished a lot, when you get to the end and you realize, oh, it was actually longer than I thought, you kind of forgive that because you're going, I would have preferred if we had a greater discussion of what could have been, the length of this time could have been. Or not discussion, but an indication. But it didn't kill the story for me. So I'd say this was a more superficial problem, and it was somewhat pervasive because there were a lot of times where even just time passed and there was nothing to indicate that. I mean, it would have been as simple as just having a quick montage showing that they're walking and camping. Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson movies, did this so well. There were many times where we just saw people walking because they wanted to convey they're going on a long-ass journey. This is going to take months for them to get from place A to place B. In Game of Thrones, they actually had plot taking place during the travel, so that way you realize, like, geez, they left Winterfell, and it's been 2 whole episodes before we get back to King's Landing, because it took that long for them to get there. So, yeah, it's something that could have been fixed very easily, but at the same time, it didn't destroy the story for me. So that I considered is very superficial, despite it being something that was pervasive in Wheel of Time. Withholding information in order to create a moment of revelation where the audience could not have possibly figured it out on their own. This is something that bothers me in every story that tries to do this, because it's just a cheap way of doing the, like, oh, the butler did it. Except that if you go back and read the book again, or you watch the movie again or show again, there was never any clues to indicate that the butler did it. They just like, oh, and by the way, this clue that I never told you about right here reveals that the person who did this crime must have been in this room at this time. And because everybody could be accounted for in whatever rooms they were, the only one who couldn't have been accounted for, it is the butler. And we go, well, we didn't know any of that other information. You literally just revealed it to us just now. And we're supposed to go, oh my gosh, it was the butler the whole time? It doesn't matter. We didn't guess who it was because we couldn't have guessed who it was because there were no indicators that should have made us go like, oh, maybe it's this thing or maybe it's this thing. There's nothing worse than reading a story and you go, did I miss the clues? Like, did this go over my head? So you go back and you read it again and you go, no, I didn't. They just didn't put it in there because it would make them feel like, oh, I'm clever for not telling you what happened. Well, this happens in the Wheel of Time, and it happens a couple of times. The first time it happens is during the Who is the Dragon mystery. How did we discover who the dragon is at the end? Well, they told us that there was this flashback. There was this scene that happened between Rand and his dad, and you never saw it happen because we never showed it to you. But there was very strong hints in that scene that there's something special about Rand and where he was born, and those fulfill the prophecy that he's going to be born on Dragon Mountain. You see what I mean? We couldn't possibly have guessed that it was him until it is literally revealed it's him. Another thing is what really is going on with Moiraine. Like, is she actually cut off from the One Power, or is she just shielded, or whatever? How do you call it? She said shielded. What's going on with her? They waited until the very end of season 2, where Rand is like, hey, we know that you can see, the One Power, Rand, so why don't you look at her and see what's wrong with her, what's wrong with her connection to the One Power. And he's able to see that Ishamael had basically tied her up and tied her off. I don't know. So she's like, she's shielded. She's not cut off. And the way that they could have set that up, they could have made it so that we go, oh, that's what was going on. They could have made it so that it felt like that, but they didn't. If they had given us more clues about how Lan felt with the bond, because I think what they were trying to indicate was that Lan could somehow sense that the bond was not yet broken, but they've never defined what it feels like for him to be masked, to have the bond masked. Does being masked feel identical to being cut off? And there are times when they kind of indicate like maybe it feels the same, but maybe it doesn't. Why did he think that she wasn't cut off? Like, what was it in his head that made him say she's definitely not cut off? Because she tells him right at the beginning or right at the end of season 1, she goes, I've been cut off or whatever. I forget what the hell she says. Or I've been stilled. It doesn't matter. But he doesn't believe her through all of season 2, and there's no reason for us to understand why he thinks that. But if he feels like I'm still drawn to her, I can still sense where she is, and I'm sorry, but him finding her after she ran away from the house and got attacked by those Fades, that's not enough of a clue. That is, he tracked her horse as she ran away, and she just didn't get very far, because we also have the 2 women who can channel and their warders show up to save her as well. If it was like Lan is the only one who finds her because he's the only one who could have, that would have been a good clue that the bond still exists. That was unforgivable. And I know that's season 2, but the thing is they were doing it in season 1 as well. This one to me feels like it is it's a frequency issue, because it could also be foundational as well. Because they're not telling us what's going on, anything could be happening. If you don't know what's going on and it could be anything, you have no investment in believing that it's one thing. So you're not like, ooh, I thought it could be this other thing. Because you're like, I don't know, space aliens could land and tell us that it's all part of the Matrix. And I'd probably believe it. That's an extreme, but I think you get what I mean. But yeah, and actually this kind of falls into all categories because it's a foundational problem that happens frequently because the issue is brought up so many times and it affects what they're doing and the way characters are behaving. But it's also not isolated. It has a chain reaction because you didn't tell us at the beginning what happened or lead us to believing that, this is what's going on, so that we're like, oh, we definitely believe she's been stilled and the bond no longer exists. Like it's just wiped out. Because that wasn't said or wasn't shown, we didn't believe that is what was going on through the whole story. So we get to the end of the season finale in, season 2, and we're going, well, we knew it could have been anything. So when you told us it was something, we're like, okay, The next issue is tangent character arcs or plots. And this would be like a side quest. Think of it as something that happens to kind of waste time so that you can have your character doing something and then they come back to the main plot of, whatever their journey is. There were a lot of things in The Wheel of Time that felt like that, but because they made it so that these were actually obstacles on their way to their final destination, I was okay with most of it. So things like, and I know that these actually happened in the book, so this is fine. When everybody gets separated from Moraine, when they go to Shadar Logoth, is that it? No, it's not Shadar Logoth, whatever. That weird abandoned city that they're in, and then the dark spirit comes out and tries to attack them all, and they all get separated, okay? Matt and Rand going into that mining town and having that encounter with the innkeeper, that's kind of like its own little side dealio, but they presented it as this is an obstacle on your way. Like they are trying to get to Camelin because they know that's where everybody's headed. So in the story, I'm okay with this because I felt like, all right, it makes sense. They've all been separated. They're all going to try to get there. We want to see them go through experiences that affect them profoundly as characters on the way to the end. And for the most part, these characters did, with the exception of, I think, Egwene and Perrin until they got captured by the White Cloaks, but then they got rescued from that like at the end. So it's like a lot of stuff happened where they're just traveling and talking but not doing anything. So anyway, okay. I'll go more into that at some other point, but a tangent plot or character arc is something that does not completely derail from the main story, but it causes the progress in the main story to pause for some reason. And the way that you make it not useless or not feel like a side quest is when you give it a certain level of value. And when it does it, and I feel like, we could have done that in a shorter way, or we didn't need this huge, big chunk of time taken up doing this thing that didn't advance the story any further, you kind of go like, you just need to make it more valuable or I won't enjoy it. I'll feel like it was a waste of time. Now, an extreme of this is a dangling arc or plot point. Now, this would be like Perrin and his wife, him killing his wife at the beginning. Now, a character who is distilled should be consumed by the things that have started this character out in your story. We should see that we get to the end of the, any point in that character's arc, you can open up a page or watch a scene on the TV and you go, I can see that they're still dealing with this issue. Like it should be permeating every inch of their character. This is a distilled character. This is actually how Pixar writes or used to write a lot of their stories, that they would draw everything out on storyboards and then they would have their editors come in and take anything that didn't relate to the theme or like the main emotions, the main points that they were trying to make. Like they would find what is the super refined point of this story. Now, anything that does not exemplify that or directly affect amplifying that main moment, we got to get rid of it. And so they would get rid of it and then they'd be like, now can we make a story out of this? That's kind of what you do when you're editing your characters and your plots. You want to make sure, and your themes, you want to make sure that everything is doing exactly what it's supposed to and only that. If it's separating off and doing other stuff, like it started something else, that kind of feels like a distraction. You go, why am I doing this when it doesn't ever do anything? And so Perrin's wife, to me, is a big one. Now, we see him killing his wife being something that seems to haunt him, but it doesn't seem to affect the way that he does everything. Like, okay, so when he's with Egwene, we really should have seen him clinging to her like, I'm going to protect her, or like he's afraid of her being in danger all of the time. And we saw a couple of hints of it, but there were too many moments where I'm going, did you forget that you hacked your wife to death? I'm not really sure. And then we get to the end, and it turns out that their whole being together thing was leading up to a possible, not threesome, what do you call it, a love triangle with him and Egwene and Rand. And I felt like this is disconnected. How is this? We should have seen Perrin at the very end of season 1 actually taking action, deciding something with his life that has to do with the violence that he committed at the very beginning. He should be like, I am willing to kill in order to protect, if that's the thing that was plaguing him the whole time. But we didn't see him actually take action. He goes off looking for Padden Fane, can't find him, then goes back to the throne room and realizes everybody's dead. He finally picks up a weapon, but at that point he doesn't do anything. It's too late. He's done nothing. And that itself could have been addressed, that he didn't act, and he should have. Like, it could be a big regret for him. But then we get into season 2, and that's not really addressed at all. He's with the Shienarans and he's doing stuff with them. We see him like have a moment where he's mourning the loss of his wife and he's going to put the ring on the little lantern raft thing. But then he puts the ring back on. And we're like, okay, so he hasn't let go of this guilt that he has for her. But we get to the end of season 2, and where did that plot go? Having a dangling plot or character arc like that makes you feel like, what was the point of putting it in the first place? It did not have a major impact on your character or on your story. It didn't serve the main story. Another one is unearned stuff, or unearned changes, really is what it should be. So there are a lot of unearned things in this show. I've already mentioned Lan and Nynaeve's romance. It was not earned, so I don't believe it at any point. It just wasn't set up. These characters, I don't believe they would fall in love with each other. The interaction that they had, it was as if they were in 2 separate rooms having conversations and they couldn't hear the other person talking. They were literally just talking to the wall, and somebody decided, we'll edit this together and make it work, because they didn't make sense. Their interaction made no sense. So I didn't believe anything of their romance going forward from that point on. This is a pervasive issue. This is a foundational issue because it is setting up a romance. This is a chain reaction type of issue. It's not isolated because it affects everything that has to do with their relationship going forward. Another one for me was Egwene's magic. Now, she is supposed to be able to channel. We see her do it a little bit in season 1, and then again towards the end of season 1. And then the very finale, but I don't know if that counts because she didn't really channel. The other lady like did her power up through her, doesn't really matter. Either way, she was a novice. She was a very, very early beginner. And when we get to season 2, she's stopping herself from learning. She's literally holding her hands at her side, like, I'm not going to do anything. And it was never explained. So this is a withholding information thing as well. It's never explained that if she does use her hands, she'll never be able to channel without using her hands, and she doesn't want to use them. But we've seen her channel without her hands before when she was in that tent. So I'm like, now she can't do it for some reason. I'm not really sure why she suddenly can't do it anymore. And she's like, oh, I'm really struggling and I've been trying so hard. Oh my gosh, I really can't do it. I'm so depressed. And she goes and she complains to Elaine. And then the next time that we see her, she's channeling right at the other side of Liandrin. Liandrin's like, ticking her off and about to leave, and she like sends this blast of fire to the other side of Liandrin, which I think would take precision, and you would really need to know what you're doing so you didn't accidentally kill the lady in front of you. But she does that, and I'm going, when did she learn how to do that? I thought we were going to see her and Elaine practicing in the rooms. It was unearned, her getting to that level. And then the next scene, we see her using her hands to channel at the arches. And I'm going, so have you mastered not channeling with your hand, like channeling without your hands? Is that what we're saying here? It was, again, withheld information, but also an unearned change in this character, or an unearned power up in her case. So that for me was unforgivable, because I don't believe that she would have gotten to this point. Again, it's like illogic. It's just like broken logic. I've already mentioned bad or illogical dialogue, but I did write that one down. Now, this is an example of something I'm actually willing to overlook, like if the dialogue is just kind of not great, but if like the acting's okay, and like they've really tried hard to pull it off well, which we've seen do. I'm trying to remember some instances of it, but I know that exists because I remember saying like, hey, I thought that actor did a really good job despite having really crap dialogue. Actually, this show has done that quite a bit. But illogical dialogue is different. Illogical dialogue that messes up how characters communicate with each other and how they got together or stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. So maybe I shouldn't even say illogical dialogue, but just clumsy dialogue. Dialogue is not great. I can kind of get over that if everything else is amazing. If everything else seems so good that I'm willing to forgive that thing, like it outweighed it, like, 70% to 30%, like, oh, it was a small issue. Well, I guess 30% is kind of a bigger issue, but let's say 20% I'm going to count it as. I can overlook that. Bad special effects, I can overlook. If it's a book, like I said, bad prose, I can overlook. This kind of thing counts as a superficial issue. It's not deeply ingrained in the story and the characters unless it is affecting the story and the characters, in which case, in Wheel of Time, it was, because it was screwing up conversations that characters were having with each other that are supposed to be the way that characters are forming their relationship. I just didn't believe what their relationship became as a result of their conversations, because the conversations were illogical and didn't make any sense. Whew, I'm talking a lot. Showing versus telling. Now, this is another one that it can be forgivable, but you do it too many times and we get very annoyed by it because in a way it becomes an unearned thing. And the best example I can think of is, again, with Egwene. We have it's in season 1 where Nynaeve talks about how Egwene is strong, don't worry about her. And then in season 2, we've got Loial saying the same thing about Egwene. And quite honestly, there were very few instances where I felt like we were seeing Egwene really suffering bad. Because even when she was caught by the White Cloaks, so they stripped her down and wiped her down, like that was a huge thing. We should have seen how mortified she was by that if it really did affect her deeply that way. But the thing is she has already banged Rand, so being naked is not going to be like this horrible, mortifying, demoralizing thing. Yes, being stripped in front of a bunch of guys would be something, but it would be different if showing your ankles was very scandalous and you would feel ashamed of doing that. So building her character up to a point where we get her to this stage and we say, okay, this was traumatic for her, then we can believe that, and I'd go, okay, I can see that this would have been a very traumatic thing for her and she got past it. But we had to be told about her past where she was sick and she got well. But then we find out, well, actually there was some magical stuff that was done that helped Egwene get better. That was Nynaeve's doing. And then here, we didn't see her really, really deeply impacted by that particular experience. Like she was trapped, but Perrin was the one who really suffered. Now she's in season 2, and we've got Loial going like, if anybody can get through it, Egwene can. Like, she's tough cookies, man. She can do it. And I'm just going, every time somebody has either rescued her, because remember, okay, no, she did rescue Perrin, but she used the one power. I'm not sure if I'm seeing how there's resilience in her on her own. I don't feel like they have established that for this character, she really is tough. Like when Loial said it, I just was kind of going, I don't know about that. I don't know if I feel like out of all the people in the group, she's the one. Now, by the end of season 2, I'm going, yes, I do get this. This is believable. She's really been through something now. So I like this. I want her to be that character by the end of season 2. But I don't want Loial to say this is who she is beforehand, because that's not who she is. I could actually go on and on forever. I've got so many things written here on this page, but I'm gonna run out of time and this video is gonna be too long. But at a certain point, when you find these errors, you come across them and you say, okay, is this a superficial issue? Yes, it is a superficial issue. I can look over it. Okay, it's throughout the entire show, but it's not affecting my enjoyment of the characters and the plot, so we're good. Then you come across a little problem. It's isolated, but it's a little problem, and we go, oh, okay, I can forgive that one. But then we get 2 scenes later, and there's another little problem. I go, okay, it's just a second time. And by the time you get to the end of the first episode, if you're going, I kept finding issues. They were small, but I kept finding them. You feel like there's clumsiness in the storytelling. And of course, when it's a bigger issue where it does have a chain reaction, or it's a foundational issue where, something that has been done improperly makes it so you can't understand it through the rest of the story, or something has been set up, this is the chain reaction, in a way that's not believable, so that any time that we're supposed to reference this thing, like the Nynaeve and Lan relationship, we're supposed to feel about it a certain way, we just can't. When this happens enough, you tend to get to the point where you say, you know what? I'm not going to forgive anything anymore. Because now, everything is going to feel like a little needle in you as you're watching, as you're reading, this happens more often, I've noticed, in TV shows lately. And I think that's why I wanted to have this discussion. I think it's because a spread of talent where we were seeing writers of a higher caliber writer or a more experienced writer maybe wasn't the one who was working on these particular projects with as much control as they would need. Maybe the process of editing is out of control or out of whack, and we're seeing that it's not really going through the same kind of edits that we used to do that would make you get to the end of a story and go, wow, I really enjoyed that. I don't know what's going on, but it is rather disappointing to feel like when a movie or TV show comes out, I expect it to not be good. We all have felt this, we all have experienced this, and I do feel that it's in the writing that we are seeing the biggest issues. I hear a lot of people complain about, actor performances and special effects not being great or whatever, but really, if it's the story and the characters, if they're doing okay, I can be okay with that. And that's where we're seeing the problem, and that's why it's not forgivable. That's why so many of these shows and movies get to us where we go, I just can't enjoy it anymore. I can't tolerate the errors, even the little ones. So people who are nitpicking, I don't think that they're nitpicking just for the sake of nitpicking. I don't. I mean, I try to, be clear. I think I'm nitpicking at this point, but for the most part, I go in wanting to enjoy it. And when I reach a point where I'm saying, I'm finding more mistakes than I am finding things I enjoy, that's my limit. I can't take it anymore. For me, that was episode 3, I believe. It was the Lan and Nynaeve. I was looking for something to root for in this story, something positive, because I didn't enjoy the characters. They were all kind of not great. And that was supposed to be it. And I'm just like, I don't know. I'm not feeling it. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'd love to hear from you guys. What are some forgivable and unforgivable mistakes that you're finding in the Wheel of Time show, or any show? Honestly, I thought of stuff for Rings of Power, but I decided not to include it in this video because I really wanted to focus on the Wheel of Time for this one. But yeah, what are some flaws that you find forgivable? I think those are the big ones. They're the little ones that we see them and say, I can live with this because everything else about this part of it I'm enjoying. And at what point for you were the mistakes unforgivable? Because I think the majority of my audience agrees with my assessment of the show, and that is that it's unforgivable. While you're here, don't forget that I've got a live stream on Friday. That is July 19th, so 2 days from now? That will start at 5 p.m. and go till 7 p.m. Pacific time or Arizona time, and the subject is the Wheel of Sin. I should come up with a different name. That is this Friday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. Other than that, please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. If you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or hit the money heart thanks button down below. You can subscribe or you can leave a one-time tip. I'm grateful for anything. And I guess that's it. Be good to yourself.